What if I told you a wild Mustang from America once crossed an ocean to outrun the world's greatest Arabian war horses? This is the story of Hidalgo, the untamed horse that nobody believed in. In the late 1800s, a half-Lakota cowboy named Frank Hopkins claimed he and his Mustang Hidalgo raced 3,000 brutal miles across the desert, a feat so impossible, some say it never happened. But truth or not, this legend would gallop through history and Hollywood alike. Get ready for a tale where myth collides with fact, where a humble Mustang challenges royalty, and where the spirit of the wild still runs free today. This is Hidalgo. Frank T. Hopkins was born in the mid-1800s, by his own account, around 1865. Hopkins claimed his father was a scout for the U.S. Army, and his mother was Lakota Sioux. From childhood, he said, he rode Mustangs across the Great Plains, learning to break wild horses before he could properly write his name. The West then was still raw. Mustangs, descended from Spanish conquistador horses, roamed the open range in vast herds, hardy, feral, and fiercely independent. For the Lakota and other plains tribes, the horse was more than an animal. It was freedom, spirit, and survival all in one. It was during these early years, Hopkins said, that he found Hidalgo, a wild Mustang he claimed to have captured and trained himself. Unlike the fine thoroughbreds of the East or the regal Arabians of the Ottoman sands, Hidalgo was short, stocky, and stubborn. But he was tough. Born in blistering heat and freezing winds, he had the lungs and legs to keep moving when purebred horses would falter. By his 20s, Frank Hopkins was a cowboy, messenger, and trick rider. He signed on with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, the grand traveling circus that thrilled crowds with sharpshooting, staged battles, and displays of frontier riding. Hopkins claimed he and Hidalgo wowed audiences with daring stunts, showing the grit of the American Mustang to astonished city folk. It was in these shows, Hopkins said, that he heard of the greatest long-distance race ever held, a legendary endurance race across the Arabian desert. The race, known as the Ocean of Fire, was supposedly a 3,000-mile gauntlet from Aden to Syria, reserved only for purebred Arabian horses, ridden by Bedouin masters. The challenge was simple but impossible. No outsider had ever been allowed to enter, let alone a man with a scrappy Mustang. Hopkins, so the story goes, was invited as a novelty, a sideshow act to amuse the local sheiks. They expected him to die. They expected Hidalgo to fail before the sun rose twice. In 1890, according to Hopkins's tale, he and Hidalgo sailed for Arabia. They disembarked into a world unlike anything the wild Mustang had seen. Endless dunes, shimmering heat, and the proud Bedouin tribes who lived by the code of the desert. For the Bedouin, the Arabian horse was divine. Centuries of careful breeding made them swift, intelligent, and loyal. Compared to these elegant mounts, Hidalgo looked like a farm pony, ready for the plow. Riders mocked him. Some even tried to sabotage him, seeing him as an insult to their heritage. But when the race began, Hidalgo and Hopkins showed what years of rugged survival could do. Where purebred Arabians faltered from thirst and heat, Hidalgo pressed on, head low, hooves steady. Hopkins told tales of deadly sandstorms, treacherous oases, ambushes by desert raiders, and Hidalgo refusing to quit. For weeks they endured the punishing desert sun. Some accounts say Hidalgo lost half his weight. Hopkins claimed he fed him dates when there was no grain. By the final stretch, Only a handful of riders remained, and in Hopkins' version, Hidalgo crossed the finish line first, defeating the finest horses Arabia had to offer. Victorious but battered, Hidalgo and Hopkins returned to America. Hopkins said he refused the prize money, demanding instead that it be used to buy Mustangs from government roundups to save them from slaughter. According to Hopkins, he dedicated his life to protecting the wild herds he loved. The story of Hidalgo spread in dime novels and frontier barrooms. Hopkins himself told it to anyone who would listen. Some newspapers of the early 20th century printed bits of his adventures. But in the archives of racing history, the Ocean of Fire doesn't appear. No Arabian record confirms it. Many historians call it pure fiction, an old cowboy spinning yarns as wild as the open plains. Still, something about the story stuck. It spoke to the American fascination with the underdog, the nobody horse that took on the world's best, and proved heart matters more than breeding. For decades, Frank Hopkins and Hidalgo faded into near obscurity. Then, in 2004, Disney turned the story into a major motion picture. Hidalgo, starring Viggo Mortensen as Hopkins, and a handsome paint horse playing the title role. The movie brought the legend galloping back into the spotlight, mixing fact and fable in true Hollywood style. In the film, Hidalgo is a Mustang that helps Hopkins reckon with his mixed heritage while battling sandstorms, betrayal, and desert assassins. Critics noted the historical inaccuracies. Historians pointed out that no credible proof of the Ocean of Fire race exists. Nor do Arabian stud books record Hopkins's name. But the truth mattered little to audiences craving an old-fashioned adventure. The movie made Hidalgo a symbol of the wild Mustang's spirit, of the bond between man and horse, of the idea that heart and endurance can conquer bloodlines and doubt. Today, the real Mustang herds still run wild across America's West, tough, stubborn descendants of Spanish war horses, just like Hidalgo was said to be. They face new threats, shrinking ranges, government roundups, and disputes over land use. Some believe Frank Hopkins exaggerated his tales, but his myth inspired generations to look at wild Mustangs not as pests, but as symbols of freedom and resilience. The Hidalgo movie sparked interest in Mustang adoptions, endurance riding, and the effort to preserve these living icons. Hidalgo, the horse, may never have crossed an Arabian finish line, but thousands of Mustangs like him have crossed desert plains, snowy mountain passes, and rocky canyons for centuries, carrying the same flame in their eyes. So, was Hidalgo real? Was the Ocean of Fire a truth buried under shifting desert sands? Historians say no. The Arabian Horse Association says there's no evidence. But believers say that's exactly how the best legends live. Half-buried, half-whispered, galloping somewhere between dusk and dawn. And maybe that's the point, because when we talk about Hidalgo, we're not really debating old race results. We're talking about what the Mustang means, an untamed soul that refuses to bow to pedigrees, borders, or expectations. Frank Hopkins may have invented the race, but he captured something bigger, a story that made millions fall in love with the idea that a little Mustang, born wild and free, could outlast king's horses on a sea of fire. In the end, whether Hidalgo thundered across an Arabian desert or not, his hoofbeats still echo in every Mustang that runs wild today, defying fences, defying papers, defying doubt. He is the spirit that says, run farther, run freer, run wilder, and never stop, no matter what the world says you can't do.